Alright everyone, so today I wanted to go over a list of rares and epics that you are absolutely going to want to keep dupes of if you end up coming across more than one of them. Now there's a general theme that revolves around champions that are worth using more than one of in a team, and that is usually the fact that these champions are not primarily going to heavily focus on buffs and debuffs, and that's because when you have a champion that has certain buffs and debuffs, that usually fills a certain role in your team. Like if you need decreased attack or decreased defense or increased attack, increased defense, once you kind of tick that check mark and you've got the champion on your team that fills that role, having another champion that does the exact same thing is really going to take away a lot from your overall team effectiveness. There's not going to really be a need in order to do that. So most champions do have buffs and debuffs, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to use duplicates of most champions because you're going to get a lot less potential and power from the second copy versus the first one. But that's absolutely not the case for all champions. There are certain ones where they're either so powerful that even the fact that you're going to have multiple copies of the same buff, it's technically less efficient because they're already so good. It's still going to be worth using multiple copies of them. Or there are certain debuffs like poison, because poison stacks no matter how many copies of it. If you have champions that primarily revolve around stacking a ton of poisons, it's still going to be worth using multiple copies of them for things like the clan boss. So let's actually get into a list of some of these champions, and we're going to start off with, it was probably known as the best champion to use multiple copies of, and another reason is because she is a rare, so actually acquiring multiple copies of her is going to be a lot easier than a lot of epics because rares are generally going to be easier to get. Now she is a void rare, but I am talking about none other, of course, than Coldheart. Now Coldheart is just regarded as one of the best DPS based champions in the game for a couple of reasons. She's just overall an absolutely insane champion, especially considering that she is a rare and she has a phenomenal skill kit. Now her first skill attacks 4 times at random. Each hit has a 25% chance, which you can boost the skill books, of placing a 100% heal reduction debuff. Yes, not true, if you have multiple copies of her, you're not going to get additional benefit from that heal reduction debuff, but that's not really that big of a deal. Technically, yes, using your second Coldheart is going to be less efficient than your first one, but because she's so good in so many of her other aspects, it's not really that big of a deal that you lose efficiency on that heal reduction right there. So you can kind of overlook it because of how good she is. Now her second ability attacks all enemies, has a 30% chance of placing a decreased accuracy debuff, and places a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns if the target is under a heal reduction. So same thing for that accuracy. Yes, technically using the second copy of her is not going to be as efficient as the first one, but because she also has that poison and she's just going to be doing so much damage, she has a very solid auto attack that attacks 4 times as well. Now you have a very solid second skill right here. She just does so much damage, and especially when you get into her third skill, which is actually based off of enemy max HP, which is another aspect to champions that we're going to get into some other champions that have this type of ability right here. Because it scales so well when you get to the high level dungeons, generally bosses have so much HP. Now that you have an attack that is scaling off of the amount of HP that they have, you just see some absolute insane DPS numbers from skills like this. So attacks one enemy, decreases the target's turn meter by 100%, has an extra 30% chance of inflicting a critical hit. Damage increases according to enemy max HP. So you can see crazy numbers, like easily over 1,000,000 damage if you have the proper buffs and debuffs. And because of skills like this and just her overall insane skill kit, Coldheart is absolutely a champion that is going to be worth using multiple copies of, especially in dungeons like Spider. And a lot of compositions that do Spider, even on the highest difficulty, will indeed use multiple copies of Coldheart. So phenomenal champion. Great news that she's a rare as well. If you get multiple copies of her, I would absolutely not feed her or use her as skill books. I would try to keep at least a couple of them, even if you don't decide to use multiple copies of her on your team right away. You never know what the future might hold, and you never know when you might get another one. So saving that one space in your champion storage or your vault is going to be worth it. Now we move on to another champion who is an epic that has that enemy max HP scaling ability right there. And we are going to talk about Royal Guard, who is in the High Elves. Another phenomenal DPS-based champion that, once again, doesn't primarily revolve around buffs and debuffs. He does have some, but that's not his main focus. His main focus is actually going to be from his second ability right here, And because it's an AoE that scales off of enemy max HP, it just does so much damage that even though you're going to lose efficiency on, his auto attack having decreased defense, there's no reason to apply that to enemies more than once. Once you have it, you kind of tick that check mark. You don't need to apply it again. But that's okay, because this ability just does so much damage. You can kind of ignore the inefficiency of that decreased defense. So attacks on enemy has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Just a phenomenal auto attack as well. Having the strong version of decreased defense on an auto attack is insane. You have his takedown, which is based off of enemy max HP, and it's an AoE. And you also have attacks 4 times at random. Each hit has a 30% chance of placing a decreased speed debuff, and decreases the target's turn meter by 25%. So you can lower the cooldown on this, and overall just a phenomenal damaging champion that many teams will indeed use multiple copies of him if they can get him, just because of the insane damage numbers that this guy has the potential to do in things like high level dungeons. So going along with that theme of enemy max HP. Now, there's one other champion that is also an epic that does have that enemy max HP scaler. I would say out of the 3 that we're going to talk about in the video today, he's probably regarded as the worst of the 3. I'm not saying he's bad, just out of the comparison to Royal Guard and Coldheart. We also have Husk, who has another enemy max HP scaling ability. Now, his auto attack attacks an enemy 2 times, has a 20% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. Attacks all enemies, has a 35% chance of placing a stun debuff. Damage inflicted is proportional to enemy max HP. There it is. It's also another AoE right there. 5-turn cooldown, which can be lowered down to 4 turns. And attacks on enemy damage increases according to this champion's current HP. He is an HP scaling champion as well, whereas auto attack actually scales off of attack. So, this guy also has potential to do some crazy damage numbers from his second ability right there. And once again, because his primary focus is not going to be on buffs and debuffs, this is a contender for using multiple copies of if you do get him. So now we're going to move on to another theme of champions that is absolutely going to be worth using multiple copies of, and this is a champion that was actually reworked a couple of months ago, maybe not even that long, and she is now absolutely phenomenal and absolutely a contender for worth using multiple copies of, especially for the clan boss. And she went from being very mediocre to now a phenomenal clan boss champion, and that is Ironist. Airness, however you pronounce it, phenomenal poisoner. So we have her auto attack attacks one enemy, has a 90% chance, which you can boost up to 100%, placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. You have her second ability, which is insane, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of increasing the duration of all debuffs on the target by 1 turn. And as you can see with skill books, you can lower the cooldown and also get it up to 100%. And her third ability attacks an enemy, places a block buffs debuff for 2 turns. So yes, you would lose efficiency on her third ability right here if you use multiple copies of her, but because she has such a strong auto attack that places a poison that's guaranteed with a guaranteed debuff extender on her second ability with a 4-turn cooldown, you can see how stacking on multiple copies of her, even though she is an attack-based champion, which means she can be pretty squishy, if you build her right, still, you're going to see some crazy overall damage from her poison ability. So, because her main focus isn't really on buffs and debuffs, using multiple copies of her is absolutely viable in things like the clan boss. Now we're going to move on to another champion that is quite unique, that again revolves around poisons, but comes from the passive that would also still be worth using multiple copies of, and that is going to be a Colt Brawler. I've talked about this guy before. He is a very unique champion in the sense that he actually really benefits more if you don't have him fully skill booked than if you do. Attacks on enemy has a 50% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. You can increase that up to 60%. So he's got a strong version of the poison on his auto attack right off the bat. He has this crazy second ability right here, which does a ton of stuff, but it's really his passive that is super strong. Places a 2.5% poison debuff on the champion for 4 turns at the start of each turn. Has a 70% chance of placing the poison debuff on a random enemy for 4 turns at the start of each turn. So you can see how this guy's passive alone, even if you have multiple copies of him, because poison stacks, you can end up getting some crazy damage and efficiency from this ability right here. That, as well as his auto attack, also has poison. This guy's main focus is really all about poisons. No buffs, no debuffs. He's got this ability right here, which is pretty crazy, but, Still, that's not really his main focus, so you can comfortably use multiple copies of a Colt Brawler on things like the Clan Boss and get a ton of efficiency. So if you do find a dupe of him, you're absolutely going to want to keep it. Alright, now we're going to move to some other champions that are really more unique in the sense that they just have something that is unique about them that might be worth using in certain compositions or maybe in the future. I know that there are certain compositions that actually use this champion right here because she has such a unique ability, and that is in the Dark Elves, back to a rare right here, and it's actually going to be Painkeeper. Now, Painkeeper, let's see, where is she? I forgot her icon off the top of my head. I think this is it. Yeah, here it is. It's her third ability right here. And this used to be really, really powerful in unkillable compositions, but now that it's not quite as good, they nerfed it. It's still viable, but it's not quite as good as it was before. This ability, though, is just so unique. Decreases the cooldown of all ally skills by 1 turn. It has a 7-turn cooldown, but you can actually lower it down, as you can see, 3 times with skill books. That if you actually come up with some clever ideas, this is a champion that once again is absolutely going to be worth using multiple copies of, but not really for any of the reasons that we talked about in this video. Not really for the insane DPS, not really for the poisons. It's mostly because of the uniqueness of this ability. And I know that there are some other champions that also have some unique abilities like this that might be worth using multiple copies of. This is another fun thing about Raid Shadow Legends, is there's always people coming up with crazy ideas and compositions for champions that revolve around certain unique abilities like this. So, you know, if I missed out certain champions that you guys think are absolutely worth using multiple copies of and worth keeping dupes of, please let me know, because I know that there are plenty of other ones. This video really just kind of touched on the bare basics and kind of the ideas of what is going to be worth considering when it comes to using duplicate champions. So that's pretty much going to be it for the video today. I know I could talk about this for a while longer and get into a part 2, and I definitely might in the future, but at least now, hopefully you should have a solid grasp on the concepts of what makes champions worth keeping dupes of, and what champions are going to be worth using more than 1 copy of in a team composition. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this in the future. If you want to help out, tossing a quick like means more than you can imagine, so thank you to all of you guys to do that. And more Raid Shadow Legends videos, guides, tutorials, and all that fun stuff should be popping up on the screen right about now. Feel free to check them out, but if not, until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.